Well, we knew it was only a matter of time until Congress could get its hands into regulating cryptocurrencies. And just a short time ago, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's the head of the Senate Banking Committee and the Senate, very powerful position, called on Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to mitigate the risks of cryptocurrencies. Of course, this comes on the heels of what we heard from Fed Chair Jerome Powell as well. And now joining me to talk about these risks and the coming regulation in the crypto space and much more is Gareth Soloway. He's the master trader and head author of In the Money Stocks. He is a pro trader, master of, even on your Twitter profile, master trader over at inthestocks.com. Good to see you, Gareth.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. Yeah, and it's master pro. It's just one more word to describe that I have lots of experience, which means lots of mistakes in my career that I've learned from.
Lots of bloody lips. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the people we want on the show, not 25-year-old YouTubers who don't have never been through the pain and suffering of what this market can throw at you. So welcome to the show, Gareth. So that is the big headline this morning that I wanted to talk about is what we've been hearing these drips and drabs over the past few months from the Fed, looking at both stable coins, but in the broader crypto space. Can you tell me what's going on here? What do you think is Congress's end game here, or the Biden administration's end game?
Yeah, so I mean, you definitely need to see regulation come in. The question is how much regulation? Does the government try to overregulate? Now, the reason why I'm not opposed to some regulation is because if there's going to be more corporate adoption, you need to have more regulation. If pension funds are going to eventually invest in crypto as 5% of their pension fund, you need to have more regulation and clarity there. So yes, it's, you always worry about the government over regulating, but at the same time, I think it actually could help the price of Bitcoin to see some regulation. And the hope is that, when you get the politicians together on both sides of the aisle, hopefully it comes out at the right point. I mean, that's always what's supposed to happen. But the question is, will it? So I'm eagerly watching to see how this goes and where it goes from here. I do think that, again, crypto is used in certain illicit activities, and you want to try to clamp down on that. You want to make sure everyone's paying proper taxes and so forth like that. But again, the question is, do they go too far?
Yeah, and one of the things that Elizabeth Warren says here in this piece, in her testimony, with her questioning of Treasury Secretary Yellen, is she says the longer that the United States waits to adapt the proper regulatory regime for these assets, the more likely they will become so intertwined in our financial system that there could be potentially serious consequences if this market comes under stress. What is she talking about?
Yeah, so what she's talking about is basically that corporate adoption, right? So if you get banks and pension funds and stuff like that to start to adopt, and the longer it goes without regulation, she's actually right here, is that, eventually it's going to become so mainstream in terms of Bitcoin that it's going to be core holdings in many funds and many other things. And if all of a sudden at that point down the line, there's new regulation that causes a 20% drop in Bitcoin, which these days is no big surprise, right? I mean, we're used to 10, 20% moves in Bitcoin every week, it seems like. But if you get to a point where you have a ton of these funds that own it and you have a 20% correction, that's where you can have a systemic issue in the financial system, and it can actually cause major problems with the economy. And I think that's what she's referring to, and she's actually right on that front.
What about stable coins? Obviously, my audience asks all the time, when you look at whether it's, whether it's Tether or, GUSD or any of these other stable coins, where do you think the United States government is going to come down on this idea of a stable coin versus maybe a more volatile coin that people are day trading or looking for more swings in the market?
Yeah, that's a tougher one for me to answer because it's not as clear cut. I look at Bitcoin as more of a gold and internet or technology side gold investment versus a Tether, which is just basically tracking the U.S. dollar and makes payments much easier on both sides, cheaper as well. And for me, I like the idea of that. Obviously, lowering the amount of fees that get charged and transferring funds all over the world is a great thing. My question is, do the other banking institutions that make money off of that, do they come in and lobby the government to not allow it as much because they want to make the fees? And again, that's going to be the interesting thing to watch, how much of the lobbying side comes in here against certain things like a Tether and making it cheaper for people to transfer money.
Where do you come down on the taxes side of this? I mean, a lot of lot of people say, well, of course government wants to get their hands in this. They're not going to want to miss their opportunity to make money off of this. They're not going to want to miss their opportunity to tax the heck out of it and to be able to make as much money out of this honeypot as possible. Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, so I mean, you're 100% right that the government wants to make sure they're getting revenue in all areas, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's just a matter of time before marijuana is federally legal, right? I mean, if you look at the amount of debt that the U.S. has taken on just in the last 5 or 10 years, if you look at the amount of printing of money that has gone on from the Fed, all of these issues point to that the government needs to look at new ways to generate revenue, which then brings you back to taxes. And obviously, raising taxes hurts the economy to certain levels. So you have to look at other ways. So for sure, the government wants to make sure that they get their piece, especially as you start to see, Bitcoin at $1 trillion, market cap and potentially going far beyond in the future.
We've obviously seen a ton of volatility in the crypto space. Big mood swings. Obviously, we finally Bitcoin bouncing back to where we were in March, finally cracking that 40,000 range. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to chart this for us, figure out where things are going right now. Have the shorts been totally dropped out of the system right now? Is that why we're seeing this resurgence? Do you believe price predictions over 100,000 for Bitcoin? I'd love to get your thoughts on that. So you've got some charts here. Let's dive into this.
Yeah, so this is the Bitcoin daily chart, and again, each candle represents 24 hours. Now this is super interesting, right? So what you saw was a head and shoulder pattern here, and it played out perfectly to the target of 30,000. You then got a bounce back. Then we pierced 30,000, which scared a lot of people, got some people to go short, stopped out some others. To me, that was just a game by the institutions as they pushed it back up. Then you got a close below, which was another game. It was one step further. And you have to marvel at how the powers that be oftentimes push people just one more step to their limit and gets more people out saying, oh, it closed below 30,000. Now it's really going to see a big drop. And then what do? They rip it the other way. Interestingly enough, the green candle right after the close below 30,000, that was the day that Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, and Cathie Woods met, got a little bit of a pop. Then you had the Amazon rumor about them putting out ads for hiring people with crypto experience. That turned out to be false. No one can even find an ad, but another just beautiful pump up. Now, after all of this, the chart is telling me that we're still within a range. So I know people went from the extreme bearish down here on the chart to now extreme bullish. But as a technician, and this is what I do mostly for my career, is just study charts. You have to just remember that right now, you can see here from the drop down, this was basically your trend line across the top, and we're right back to that same upper end of the range. So for me, right now, I'm kind of just looking at Bitcoin and saying, okay, it's trading in a range. It's going to go choppy here. If it breaks above this 41,000 level, it could go as high as this gap fill around 50,000. But at the same point, there's no guarantees of that. It could just as easily break below 30 and go all the way down to 20. So just to give you a sense of where I am on my charting and where I'm expecting price to go, I think ultimately, even if we go a little bit higher here, there's another leg down to about the 20,000, 18,000 level. I think that's going to coincide with a kind of a blow up in the financial system in terms of, way too much margin out there, kind of a de-risking situation, deleveraging situation. And then down the line, you will absolutely see Bitcoin head towards 100 and then 500,000. So for me, it's a matter of just washing out. I want to see where CNBC doesn't talk about it anymore. I still remember back in, I think it was 2019 or 20, right, in the early portions just before it started to take off. They took off that little box on their screen that showed the price of Bitcoin, and they didn't even talk about it anymore. And that was the low. That was the time to buy. So I always look at these type of indicators as well. And right now, there's still too much focus on Bitcoin. So it tells me that ultimately it has to flush again before it starts making that next climb to 100 to 500.
I mean, do you ever think we'd be sitting here saying that, wow, Bitcoin is range bound? And it really is. When you look at your chart and you put it in this, true. I mean, and it just as easily is hitting that top there, top of that range could just as easily wash back down into the 20s. So I have to ask you, where do you see it pushing even higher right now, or do you think we're going to get another washout here?
So that's a question that honestly I'm not 100% sure on. All the chart tells me is that we have resistance here. So the way a technician does it is you learn to respect resistance until proven otherwise. So
Right.
if we were to get above this line, then all of a sudden I'd say, okay, well now the field is open for it to rise to this next resistance right here, just under 50,000 or right around 50,000. But as long as it hasn't broken above, especially with how many bulls have come out of the woodwork, it would make me very nervous about saying that, oh, it's definitely going to go higher at this point. Let it break first, and then you could go on to that side of saying, yeah, it's going to go higher at this point.
Great advice. Great advice. Something we talk about here all the time. It's let it show its hand first before you're
Hmm.
making a move. I mean, you're seeing that resistance right there. Why would you?
Yeah.
Why would you chase the high on that right
Yeah,
now?
by nature, we're gamblers, and we like to just, we go with what our hopes and dreams are, right? So if you're a bull on Bitcoin, you're like, oh, it's going to do it, so I'm going to buy it just before the level. Every time I've done that in my career, I've lost. So I've learned the hard way,
Yes.
like we talked about at the beginning, to kind of wait and see.
I think about every time I've done that, I've gotten bit, except today when AMD was pushing crazy. So on AMD today, it was about the only time I managed to chase when I shouldn't have chased and managed to make some money.
There you go, right?
Yeah,
You believe it or
AMD.
not, I mean, just as a learning thing. So as I'm training these traders and stuff like that, one of the things we always come across is, sometimes people do stuff they're not supposed to do, and it still works out. And you always don't like to see that because it reinforces a negative, a bad habit essentially. So you will ultimately win on certain things you chase. I mean, heck, you could have bought Bitcoin at 30,000 and made money to 60,000, but in the scheme of your investing career, doing that over and over again, eventually you'll end up giving up your money.
Exactly. Yeah, I do not recommend what I did today on AMD to anyone. So don't do that. Don't do that. Well, Gareth, it's been great having you here on the show. I'd love to have you back on a regular basis here if your schedule allows it. Really great insights as we look towards what's happening in the crypto space over the next few months, and towards the end of the year, we'll see what comes out of Washington. But Gareth, where can people find out more about what you teach and all of your great insights?
Yeah, so the number one place I like to send people is to Twitter at Gareth Soloway. That's where I post lots of good charts and information. It's all free. If you still want more, come to my website, inthemoneystocks.com.
Awesome. Gareth, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.